Yo, YouTube, what's up with your boy, Sports and Fitness Rants? I'm back, guys. Click that like button. Subscribe to my channel. What's up, y'all? Welcome back, guys. Welcome back. Got another great video for you guys today. As usual, you guys know the deal on this channel. It's all about setting the record straight, stopping the lies, stopping the narratives, holding these guys to a standard, the standard that the other all-time greats, the other players of the past eras, they were held to the same standard. They played to that standard. And we're going to talk about in this video, guys, how the guys that I grew up watching in the 80s and the 90s, specifically the 90s, they were not perfect, these guys. The players were not perfect, but they held the standard. They held the standard of the previous eras, guys. And we're going to talk about some of the things in detail and what I really mean when I talk about the standard, because I don't think a lot of these new age fans, they don't really understand what we're talking about when I say the standard and how the standard has been lowered. The bar has been lowered for these guys today to appear to be so much greater than the past players. They've lowered the standard for these guys. That's why. And we're going to talk about the standard from the previous eras. The guys I grew up watching in the 80s and the 90s, guys. We're going to talk about the standard they upheld compared to these guys and really what I'm talking about, man. And I want to thank you guys, everyone across the world, everyone across the states has been supporting my channel. Once again, I am truly humbled, guys, by all support, man. It really means a lot. You guys, like I said, man, standing up for me in the comment section with some of these goofballs out here, man. So much respect to you guys. Like I said, the comments you guys leave, sharing your stories with me, man. Much respect to you guys out there. Shout out to everybody in the membership that continues to support my channel. I'm truly humble, guys. And you guys know what to do. Turn the volume all the way up. Hit that play button. Remember, these videos are for educational purposes. And let's roll. So yes, guys, like I said, man, I wanted to talk about the quote-unquote standard that I'm always mentioning on this channel. Right? I told you guys all the time, it's about stopping the lies, stopping the narrative, stopping them from rewriting the history, and holding these guys to a standard. The standard of the other all-time greats. This is what we talk about on this channel. The all-time greats. The great players from these eras. And for some reason, they love to tear down the great players from other eras and make it seem like these guys weren't even playing basketball back in the day. They were not playing basketball. They were not great athletes. I keep telling you, they want you to believe that anybody could have walked off the street into the NBA back in the 80s and the 90s or some of these previous eras. It was only over the last 10, 15 years that the NBA actually became a league of actual NBA skilled basketball players. The other eras, they were plumbers and taxi cab drivers. They were not really basketball players. So I could have played in the NBA in the 90s, or my father could have played in the NBA in the 70s or the 80s or something like that, because anybody apparently could have played in the NBA. They weren't skilled. They weren't great athletes. None of this stuff, right? They had no skills. But what I've told you guys on this channel is it remains. The standard has been lowered for the players of today's era. Over the last 15 years or so, the standard has been lowered. The bar has been lowered for these great players, so it makes it you seem that they're greater than the guys from previous eras because they've lowered the standard. And what are some of the things that I'm talking about on this channel when I talk about the standard, guys? What are we talking about? I'm going to break it down and go over some of the things that I'm talking about when I mention the standard. Now, I also want to say off the top, when I talk about the players from the 80s and the 90s, the guys that I grew up watching, right? I grew up watching the late 80s and the 90s era NBA, guys. If you guys have not noticed already, I have a pretty good memory with a lot of this stuff, man. Once again, I don't write a lot of this stuff down. I don't pre-record my videos. I don't edit my videos after doing anything. I don't have a laptop set up next to me here that I can look at stats real quick or check this or check that. Everything that I'm telling you guys is based off of the reality that I watched on the video footage growing up, watching this stuff, watching the game of basketball, playing the game of basketball with my friends out in the street, in school, whatever the case may be. Being a true fan of the game, like I said, respecting the game and the history. When I was growing up, guys, we did not tear down the 70s or the 60s players. Yo, people spoke about Bill Russell and Wilt Chamberlain. I mean, like, Wilt Chamberlain was like a myth growing up, guys. I don't know about in the circles you grew up in, but the circles I grew up in, anytime I heard Wilt Chamberlain's name mentioned, it was almost like whispered, like I said, like he was a ghost or something. Like the things that he was doing are untouchable, unattainable, and the records that he set, you don't believe half of these things. What the man was doing. And then you realize the physical strength of this guy, the ability, the athletic ability of him and things that he was able to do on the basketball court. And then you realize that he wasn't allowed to really use his physical dominance against players back in those days. They restricted Wilt Chamberlain, changing the rules to make it harder for him and things of that nature. So you earn a more respect for someone like that. They talked about Bill Russell all the time with respect. Guys like Jerry West, Elgin Baylor, Oscar Robertson. When I was growing up, these guys were considered top 10 players in the history of the game, guys, in the 80s and the 90s. Many people had Oscar Robertson or Jerry West, top 5, top 10. Bill Russell, Will Chamberlain, Elgin Baylors. These were no-brainers. No-brainers, man. No one knocked these guys and tore them down. Oh, man, who did Bill Russell play against, man? He played in an era with 8 teams. They only started saying that recently, these new age fans. So, when we talk about that aspect and how we respected past eras back in the day, and it's only been recent over the last 10, 15 years that they've been tearing down the past eras. And we know why that started. It all started with the Michael Jordan stuff, right? They got to tear down Michael Jordan and the era he played in, and they do the same thing for a lot of other great players. They excuse their greatness by saying they played in a weak era, or there weren't that many teams, or there was only white people, right? I mean, just all kinds of nonsensical statements that don't add up. It's not the facts, guys. It's not reality. And when we talk about the standard, those guys were held to a standard. They were being compared to the other greats. Remember, these guys are pioneers. The guys in the 50s and the 60s, they are called pioneers, guys. I don't think a lot of people know what a pioneer is to be the first to do something. That's what a pioneer is. Bob Cousy, the guy that they like to make fun of and mock his dribbling ability, the man was a pioneer. He was doing things that no one had ever done before on an NBA court. No one done. The things that these guys are doing today, people have done this, guys. They've done it, right? But they've lowered the standard to appear, or to make you appear, or these guys appear that they're more skilled now, i.e. the dribbling, right? They don't dribble. They're not held to the standard of dribbling. So when I talk about the standard, these are the kinds of things I'm talking about. And I'll say it again. The players that I grew up watching, the 80s, the 90s era guys, they were not perfect. You know, I love when you get a comment from somebody on a video and they'll say something like, oh, man, I saw so-and-so flop. I saw this guy do this, or this guy carry the ball. This guy traveled. Yes, these things happen in every era. These guys are not perfect. They're human beings, right? They're not perfect. They're not machines. So, yes, maybe a guy gets away with travel. A guy carries the ball here, maybe got away with it. Maybe a guy did flop in the 80s or flop in the 90s. But once again, the standard is not being held the same across the board because these guys were not perfect, and I've never said they were perfect. They were not perfect, guys. The thing about it was that we respect them because they were consistent. They were consistently being held to that standard and living up to that standard. And let's go over some of these points here. So I just mentioned the standard of the officiating, right? They're not being held to the same standard of the officiating, right? So what do we see now in the NBA? A lot of these guys carrying the ball and traveling all over the court. But the problem with that is, no, these guys are not perfect either. But the problem is when they say today that these guys are more skilled than the players of the past, and they use their dribbling as an example of this. This is where you expose these guys. Because if you really watch the game, then you can clearly see the things that Bob Cousy and Jerry West and Elgin Baylor and Oscar Robertson, the way that they had to dribble the ball, the way that they were officiated was a higher standard. The standard was higher. The standard has been lowered for these guys and the dribbling for them. So, oh man, Jerry West couldn't dribble the way these guys dribble. He couldn't dribble like Kyrie Irving. No, Jerry West could do those things if he was allowed to carry the ball and manipulate the ball the way these guys are today. That doesn't take away from these guys, but you can't then say they're more skilled than the past eras when in fact they're not more skilled because they're not being held to the standard. The standard's been lowered. The bar's been lowered for them to appear to be much more skilled than the guys from the 60s or the 70s, the 80s or the 90s. Isaiah Thomas had much skill dribbling the basketball. Tim Hardaway had skill dribbling the basketball. Mahmoud Abdul-Rauf. There were many guys that had dribbling skills back in the 90s. Many guys. Michael Jordan had dribbling skills. Anthony Hardaway. Right? Some of these guys, they could dribble the basketball very, very well. Once again, they were being held to a higher standard, right? We think about that kind of stuff. Being held to a higher standard. John Stockton couldn't dribble the ball. Jason Kidd couldn't dribble the basketball. Gary Payne had no dribbling skills. Mark Jackson, Rod Strickland, these guys didn't have any dribbling ability. And what are we saying here? Obviously, these guys could dribble the basketball. Magic Johnson couldn't dribble the ball. Like, you know what I'm saying? Like, see, this is where they get exposed. Those guys had skills, and they were being held to a high standard. Once again, they weren't perfect, but they were being held to a standard more consistently than these guys are today. So that exposes that. How about we think about something like playing all 82 games? I know I've talked about many times on this channel, and I think a lot of people today, they don't take it serious. They brush it off, these guys. Oh, man, who cares if a guy plays 82 games? They really say that the fans today, they're supposed to be fans of basketball. But I told you what, they're not fans of basketball. They're fans of a particular player, and that's it. So they don't care if the guy doesn't show up to work for 82 games. That's hurting the product. That's hurting basketball. That's why they had to come out with load managing guidelines against these guys. Because they weren't showing up to the games. It's hurting the game. It's hurting the game. If you're a fan of basketball, you want the best players on the court as much as possible, competing. First of all, these guys are getting paid a crazy amount of money now. So damn it, you should be out there. There's no excuses. I don't want excuses. How many games they're playing and how many nights. Once again, the standard was more for the guys back in the day. They had to play 2-3 games in 4 nights. They had to play back-to-backs more often. They didn't have the luxury of these private jets and all this, all these trainers and all this staff helping them out. They didn't have the advantage of this fancy, cool sneakers and nice, fancy basketball courts. You see some of the courts in the 80s? Did you see some of the courts these guys are playing on? Did you see the old Boston Garden and the way that floor looked? Does that look anything like the floors these guys are playing on today? Do you see the sneakers that a lot of these guys were playing in back in the 80s and the 90s? Does that look like anything that these guys are wearing today? It's a lot different, right? All this stuff, the advancements in medicine, technology, the rims that these guys are using, the backboards, all that stuff is different from the guys from the 60s, the 70s, the 50s. It's a completely different world for these guys. They have way more advantages on their side than the guys did back in the day. But the guys back in the day were able to play 82 games more consistently. No, not every guy in the 90s or the 80s played 82 games. Once again, it's the consistency at which these guys show up to work. They were there more often than not. They were there for 81 games, 82 games, 75, 78 games, 79 games. They were there. Now these guys are there for 50 games, 55 games, maybe 60 games. 65-game minimum is a stretch for these guys. These guys were upset. They had a minimum put on them. Once again, they're not living up to the standard. That's why they came out with the guidelines, you goofs. You weren't living up to that standard, guys. The other players, the other eras lived up to those standards. They didn't have to come up with guidelines for those guys because they show up to work. They didn't get paid all the money these guys get paid today, but they still show up to work, guys. Which leads me to my next point about the standard, the effort. The effort that these guys play with in the 80s and 90s, the guys that I grew up watching, they gave effort more consistently than the guys do today. The guys today are not giving the effort consistently. They're walking around on defense. They're lollygagging. They're not even trying to give effort on defense because defense is not important anymore. But in the 80s and 90s, you had to give effort on both sides of the ball to be considered a complete basketball player. Offense and defense. That's what you needed to do to be respected as a player. You had to give the effort on both sides. You didn't have to be a great defensive player. You had to give the effort, though. And you had to be consistent. Whether it was a help defender, right, playing great team defense. You didn't have to be a lockdown defender. Giving the effort on both sides. The effort today is lacking compared to the guys of the past. That goes back to the 82 games. They're not giving the effort. They don't want to push themselves, right? They don't have the same toughness as these guys back in the day. They're more prone to injuries. And even things that are not really injuries, they'll sit out now. Right, a little sprained ankle or a twisted ankle or a sprained finger, right? They're not feeling good, right? I tell you, a lot of times these guys just want to sit on the sideline and wear their goofy outfits. They think that they're cool. They think they got swag. So they want to sit out and sit on the sideline in these stupid outfits these guys wear. It's an embarrassment, man. They're not living up to the standard. Once again, not living up to the standard. The love of the game. Right? Do these guys play with that love of the game? All this stuff goes hand in hand, guys. 82 games, the effort. Wouldn't you want to be playing every single game? If you really love this game, you would want to play as much as possible. I wouldn't want to miss games. And that's how the guys in the 80s and 90s came across to me. They didn't want to miss games. But plus, they had to show up and get paid. They had to earn that money, earn their spot on the team, earn their role, earn the respect of the fans, of their contemporaries. They couldn't just sit out games and, yo, man, you all right? Nah, man, I'm not feeling, I'm just going to sit out, man. I'm just taking a rest day. You would not be respected by your teammates, by your contemporaries. Now these guys don't even care. The guy comes to the arena in civilian clothes. Nah, I'm not playing today. It's a rest day for me, man. I'm taking a rest day, guys. What? And then they're more worried about what they're going to do after the game. This is this era, guys. Once again, not living up to the standard, right? Not playing with that love of the game. That's why these guys today want max contracts or they request trades or they don't want to play. Oh, I'm not playing anymore, man. You guys ain't going to give me max money. But meanwhile, they won't give the max effort. That's not playing with the love of the game, not respecting the game or the fans. This is why they had to come up with the minimum of games for these guys because they don't play with that love of the game. They only play because they get money from the game. It's what about they can get from the game, not about giving back to the game. They've taken away from the game, these guys. Let's think about something like The in-season tournament, which exposes this era, right? Not living up to the same standard as the guys in the 80s and 90s. Once again, the guys in the 80s and 90s were not perfect, but they did not need an in-season tournament to get these guys more incentives to show up, to give the effort from the beginning of the season to the end of the season. They didn't come with an in-season tournament to get these guys more incentive, more money to show up and give effort and be competitive for the whole season. An embarrassment to the NBA. They've turned into a gimmick league, guys. A gimmick league. That wasn't the way the standard was for the guys back in the day. You were supposed to be out there giving the effort from the beginning of the season, from game 1 to game 82. It ain't the case in this era, guys. Not living up to the standard. They've lowered the standard for these guys and excused everything. How about the swag and the personalities of these players? These guys have really little swag, most of these guys, the star players. I mean, look at these goofballs. Paul George, Russell Westbrook, LeBron James, Devin Booker. I mean, look at the swag on these dudes, man. The outfits that these guys wear to games. Joel Embiid, got no swag. Kevin Durant, zero swag from Kevin Durant. Even Steph Curry, to a degree, to me, doesn't have the swag like that. You know what I'm saying? Not like a Magic Johnson. You know what I'm saying? Not like a Michael Jordan, like a Charles Barkley, or a personality of a Shaquille O'Neal or a Dennis Rodman. They don't have the personalities of these guys. They just don't. They don't got a Lil Penny commercial like they did back for Penny Hardaway. These guys don't have no personalities. They got no swag. James Harden. I mean, look at these guys, man. Karl Anthony Towns. These guys are a bunch of goofs, man. No personality, no swag. These guys are not likable. You can't get behind these guys. The guys in the 80s and 90s, you could get behind Larry Bird and the trash talk of Larry Bird, the swag of a Larry Bird going out there telling people what he's going to do and then doing it to them. Saying he don't want white guys guarding him. That's Larry Bird, man. Magic Johnson. Swag, man. These guys had swag. The stars back in the 80s and 90s, man, these dudes were legit. They had great personalities, man. Charles Barkley, to this day, is still a great personality. Shaquille O'Neal, to this day, is still a great personality. Those are the facts, guys. How about the fundamentals we talk about on this channel? But the fundamentals, the guys in the 80s and 90s, that's what they played with. They played with fundamentals. That's what you were supposed to build off of. The base was supposed to be the fundamentals. And everything comes off of that. Now, these guys just want to be athletic. These guys want to play all these goofy games out there, carry the ball, travel all over the place, and once again, not have the fundamentals. Not box out, not set screens are right. Everything's a moving screen now. They don't call that not living up to the standard. They've lowered the standard for these guys so they can do moving screens and all this other nonsense. They're not boxing out, right? No one's going after rebounds now. These guys don't even jump for rebounds most of the time anymore. Back in the 80s and 90s, you had to actually fight elbows and actually jump and give effort for these rebounds. You might get a tooth knocked out trying to get a rebound. Back in them days with those big dudes and those elbows and everything flying around, in the physicality of those eras, not today. How about the All-Star game too, man? Think about the All-Star game. The All-Star game is probably the biggest thing that you can highlight to show the deterioration of the NBA is the All-Star game. Because back in the 80s and the 90s, once again, the All-Star game was legit, where guys gave legit effort, guys, consistently gave the effort. Not so much anymore. They're not doing that, right? So the All-Star game has turned to what? A three-point contest, essentially, where guys are taking 100 and something three-pointers for each team. Guys are just chucking up shots. No one's playing any defense. It's not a show. Did anybody enjoy the last All-Star game? I watched it from the start to finish, guys. It was an absolute embarrassment. It was a joke, man. It was not entertaining. That was not basketball. That's not basketball, what we saw in the All-Star game. It wasn't. A bunch of lollygagging, a bunch of guys goofing around, right? Looking like a bunch of fools out there. Didn't look like great athletes to me out there. Didn't look very fundamentally sound or skilled out there to me. Once again, the All-Star game in the 80s and 90s was a competitive game. These guys went out there. I mean, guys were fouling out in the All-Star games back in the day. Guys, they're fouling out. I think the last All-Star game, there might have been 3 fouls called. Maybe 3 fouls called, guys, in the entire All-Star game. There were more fouls called in the first 5 minutes of the All-Star games back in the 80s and the 90s than they did throughout the entire game of the last All-Star game, guys. Once again, holding the standard, the guys in the 80s and the 90s, not perfect, holding the standard, out there giving the effort, keeping the All-Star game alive, right? Pushing the game forward, making it a show of entertainment for the fans. The All-Star game is supposed to be a show of the NBA players, their talent, their skills for the fans. Like the slam dunk contest, the three-point shootout, the All-Star game weekend is for the people, for the fans. The players seem to have forgotten that they're supposed to be out there playing for the people, for the fans. They're out there playing for themselves. They're out there playing for the money. Where's your money if we ain't paying, if we ain't showing up, if we ain't supporting you clowns? But they want to talk trash to us, talk down to us on social media, and have us ejected from the stands because we ain't worth a damn. And who the hell are we to say anything? Who are we? We're paying your salary, you clowns. And you don't even have enough respect for the people to go out there in the All-Star game and actually give some effort and actually play a game. So the teaming up of these guys and all these teams, a lack of competitiveness exposes this era. And when I told you guys about the 80s and the 90s, and we talk about some of these aspects of the era during then, it's not about these guys being perfect. It's not about that. It's about them holding the standard, right? Pushing the game forward, not regressing the game or making it stagnant. They continue to live up to the standard of the other eras before them. So they showed up to work. They gave the effort. They didn't team hop. They didn't form super teams and collude and try to stack the deck in their favor and get easy championships. They didn't do those kinds of things. They gave the effort more consistently. They played defense. They took pride in that stuff. They played roles. You had role players that took pride in playing a role on a team. These guys had to earn their money by showing up. The All-Star game was still official back in then. The USA Olympic team was official. These are the facts, guys. The game was more well-balanced. You guys know the deal, man. These are the facts. Remember, the guys in the 80s and 90s, they were not perfect. No one perfect. No era is perfect, but they were consistent. And like I said, they were held to the same standard, and they lived up to that standard. They were grown men that went out there and gave effort, man, and played with a lot of heart and grit and toughness. They sacrificed. The guys today, they're not sacrificing. No, they'll sacrifice the game. They'll sacrifice the fans before they sacrifice anything on their end. You guys know the deal, man. I'll catch you guys on the next one.